And all of a sudden I hear them laughing, silence, and the sound of liquid just splashing on the floor. And I come out and I look, and there's 2 glasses of chocolate milk fully spilled on the floor that I had just cleaned maybe 4 times a day, on top of the dog, on top of their clothes, and I lost it.
Welcome to the Skilled Dad podcast. This is the podcast for dads of all seasons to learn the things that they can do and engage so that they can go and equip the next generation for success. Here we sit down with everyday dads just like you to learn from their story, get inspired, and then start getting after it. So we invite you to join in, see what you can take away from this story and apply to your life on your journey to becoming the Skilled Dad. Hey guys, and welcome to the Skilled Dad podcast. My name is Zach Reeser. I'm your host, and I'm glad that you have joined us again today. If you're rejoining us, if this is the first time that you've been here, we want to say thank you. We've had a lot of new people joining, we do this podcast so that we connect dads with other dads who are thought leaders, who are everyday Joes just like us, everything. But the main thing that we have in common is that we are dad. I also know we have some moms listening. So I want to say thanks for coming and joining us here. And we hope that everyone gets something out of this conversation. Before we get to our guest, we have been testing out something new. You've probably seen it if you're joining the podcast. We are testing out our daily podcast, which is we're trying to keep it 5 minutes or less. And it's tidbits from episodes that maybe you missed. It's insights that we've gotten from things that we've been reading, things in the news, or just stories to really help get your day motivated, get you going, and have a place for you to go to in a short amount of time where you can get that fire going and get that action put into your day. So we hope you enjoy it. We'd love to hear what you think about it. But I know you're going to enjoy today's conversation because in the previous conversations I've had up to the actual recording of this, this gentleman that's on here with me today, it's just you get to connect with some people and you get to hear their stories and you have fun and you laugh and it's real. That's how it's been with my guest today, Victor. And so we were having fun with his name, and I'm going to do it, Victor. So Victor Giusfredi. So I'm saying it like Italian. It's Victor Giusfredi, but Victor Giusfredi is on with me today. Victor, thanks for being on the SkilledDad podcast.
Zach, it's such a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So you've got an accent, but I did an Italian accent, but you're not from Italy. You're from Argentina.
Right. So they told me.
So they've told you. So Victor is, so he's a dad, right? I love to talk to dads. This is a Skilled Dad podcast. And that's really where we kind of circle all of our frameworks and perspectives from. But he also is an author. He's a mindset coach. And he's had experience in a lot of different things with a really epic story. And with your book when did you come out with your book? I'll say the title in a minute, but when did you write your book?
I started writing my book a couple of years ago, somewhere around April of 2021. And it took me nearly 2 years to finish writing it, editing it, and publishing it, which came out in end of September of last year.
Perfect. So it hasn't been out for a full year yet. Would love to hear more about that. But the book that you wrote is No Grail Without Dragons, A Man's Unconventional Path to Love, Purpose, and Peace.
Right.
And so it started a couple years ago. It came out in September. So I definitely want to hear more about your book, kind of where that came from. But I want to set the table with everybody. You know, we like to be real on this podcast, as real as possible. Maybe it's too real for some people. I was telling Victor when he hopped on, I said, man, you have to forgive me because a few nights ago, my son has, had a cold or something. And I ended up laying on his floor the entire night. I woke up the next day, super not comfortable. And then a few days later, it seems like he left me a little gift. So if I sound bad and, it just kind of look worse than usual, that's probably what's going on. And so sounds like maybe we're both working through some stuff, from our kids.
Absolutely. You're not gonna sound worse. I mean, I don't usually sound this sexy. I've been caring for my kids and my daughter who's had a virus of some sort for 10 days, and same thing than you, just sleepless nights, sleeping on whatever my body lands, and just pushing through like a good dad.
That's it. So that's what we're going to do with this podcast. We both said, we're like, well, let's just push through, because that's what we do. We're going to push through it. We're both sounding sexy, looking pretty good. And, at the end of the day, if it ends up being too rough, we can always redo it, but I don't think we're going to need to. But that's who we are as dads. We're showing up, and we're going to get done what we want to get done to help other people. And, yeah, Victor, we're going to have some fun. So you ready to roll?
That's right. I'm ready.
All right, let's do it. So you wrote your book. You've got 2 kids, and you've had quite a journey in your life. What I'd like to do is hand the mic over to you and say, give us a little bit about yourself. Whatever you want to share to kick us off. But I definitely want to hit on the book. But I'm going to hand the mic to you, and you just take it from there. And it's always interesting to see where it goes.
Sounds good. And sure, I feel almost self-conscious in a way, because I do this for a purpose and not to publicize my book. But my book is the culmination of the principles or mindset shifts within myself that led me to find fulfillment and purpose in life, right? I was born in Argentina, in a small town, Mendoza, which is the capital of Malbec wine in the world. And I didn't have a father until about 2 years old. I came from a wealthy family. And then my stepdad was a nomad. So we moved around the world from age 8. I've lived in over 50 places around the world ever since.
Wow.
And he had some habits that weren't particularly the best for parenting. So I've had sort of a traumatic childhood to overcome. And that's taken me all over the world. I came to the United States at 17. I've been married and divorced twice by 36. And I got sole custody of my children in 2020, I've been raising them by myself ever since, full time. So I've been sort of a dad and a mom. And it came to a point where things had gotten so hard in my life, because I had launched multiple businesses. I launched 3 inventions. So I achieved many of my dreams in a way, but after the second divorce and struggling with single parenting, it came to a point that I thought about taking my life, just because it had become so overwhelming, and nothing that I could do seemed to be just good enough to keep pushing forward. So the night that I actually decided to do it, not in an emotional way. I was past the emotional stage of feeling like I had failed and I had been betrayed and I've been blindsided and whatnot. It just came to almost a practical manner of things, because I say, well, I have a life insurance policy about $1 million, and it has a non-suicide clause. So if after 2 years of having it, if you take your life, well, people get paid. And I said, well, maybe that'll benefit my kids, because I was struggling with work. I had just gotten laid off from corporate America. We were just getting out of the COVID quarantine. And I said, well, maybe that will help my kids. Maybe that will buy them a home, and it'll help my ex-wife just take care of them for a couple of years until they can find a flow, right? Because I really thought that I was this rock in the cogs. And that night that I surrendered, not surrendered in the religious sense of saying, oh, God, take things from my hand. I don't subscribe to that. I was more like, I'm done. There's no point. I've done everything I've wanted, and I'm here in this dark corner and the edge of the abyss, as many call it. So I'm over it. And it was at that very moment that I discovered my purpose, or I like to say my purpose discovered me, because I had an experience that I can explain. And in that moment, I realized what I had gone through, all of those challenges, and that more important than money was to share with my kids my map of experience, so they wouldn't suffer as much as I did. And because $500,000 would have never fixed my life. I probably would have blown it away and then just go back to my old habits and still make mistakes and still probably would have gotten divorced and whatnot, right? So that's what prompted the book, and ever since I've just been on this path of learning how to share what I've been through so others can just benefit from my mess ups, right? It's like a tour guide. If you're gonna go into Alaska, the wilderness of Alaska, you're not just gonna grab a backpack and go venture on your own. Maybe you will. That's what I did. But in my case, I say, well, look, a mile from here, there's a water break. 2 miles from here, there are bears. So go through the left. And so that's what I've been doing. I've been learning ways to share that with people, and that's what led to my book, which I ultimately ended up editing for men just like us, right? Just parents and men that are pursuing purpose, or pursuing their calling and struggling with everyday life.
Mm-hmm. What, how old are your kids?
10 and 8. I have a daughter who's 10 and a boy who's 8 years old.
Yeah, 10 and 8. And so it's interesting. You thought that at the time, the life insurance policy was almost more valuable to them than you were.
Yeah, especially because of all the rocks that I had thrown my way up until that time. I was the mess up. I was the bad husband. I was the one that took the kids away from her, and so on and so forth. And there's a real struggle with the labels that you're assigned, and then having to overcome them. And when the results of your life are not really supporting you, then I almost believed it. I nearly believed it.
Yeah, I mean that's a low point. And you said you had, I mean, you were you were on the lowest point. Sounds like that you could have been, but then something kind of flipped you around that you couldn't explain. What was that thing? If you're willing to share, what was that thing?
So the minute I surrendered at an atomic level, it's almost as coming to terms with the fact that my life was going to end. So I might as well just consider myself dead, because I had not found any reason to move forward. And before going through with the act, I sat on the couch and I just started thinking about what I was about to do. And I asked for forgiveness to my children and for many things, right? For keeping them away from the mom, for not being a good dad, for having failed, etc. And up until that very moment, I did not subscribe to the invisible. I did not subscribe to religion, because I had experienced probably about 7 religions throughout my life in all the movings that we went. And my dad was a big religious guy who preached, but never lived what he preached. And so that was another dichotomy in my life. I saw the hypocrites, bang their chests and say, "Oh Lord," but they're all the ones that are gonna drown in the blood of Jesus on their way to hell, sort of thing. And so I even had a misanthropic way of looking at things, because existence to me was just suffering, and it was pointless to live. And after all, I had given it my very best efforts in my first marriage in my 20s, in my second marriage, in my businesses, on my job. And it almost seemed like the rug was kept being pulled from under me. And so up until that point, not only I didn't believe in a God, but if there was a God, I was trying to find some get out of it, because I couldn't put 2 and 2 together.
Right.
And in that moment, I had a flash of insight, which is the best way that I can explain it. I consulted with a psychiatrist, because I thought that I had a psychotic breakdown. And I said, well, if that's what happened to me, then I need to know, because my kids need somebody to take care of them. And she was the first one to say, well, in my religion, that's called spiritual awakening. And that put me in this path of digging for more information through philosophy, through neuroscience, practical psychology, you name it, just to try to explain my experience. And that's why I say I can't explain it, because it's unexplainable. But in a blink of an eye, I understood why everything had happened, and I also understood that everything was just perfect the way that it is every single minute. And the Japanese call it satori, or the Chinese call it ing. NG, because it's like, hey, it's something that just happens to you, right? And all of a sudden, all these things just come together, and that's what just tilted me on this path that I've been on ever since.
That's fascinating. It sounds like you got to a point and clearly something stepped in and helped you see it from a different lens, which is awesome. And now you're using that to help others. And so what is it that you're doing on a kind of the daily basis that's using your story? You've got your book, obviously, but I know you're also working with individuals. What is it that you focus on in kind of your primary area of operation, so to speak?
I started with mindset coaching because I've always been a fan of Stoic philosophy. And when I began understanding how our thoughts affect our life experience, I went onto that path of really fleshing myself psychologically and seeing the way that I operated at a mind level, and then how that translated to my results in real life. But so I stopped coaching just because the demand became so high. And it's a good problem, right? I'm blessed that I had to tell her, listen, I don't have an open spot for 6 months, so I stopped coaching altogether so I can focus more on learning how to write better, and maybe just package my knowledge to reach a wider audience instead of just doing one-on-one sessions or maybe group sessions that maybe are not as beneficial. Because many times people don't want to listen to what you want to say; they just want to listen to what they want to hear.
Mm.
And on the other side, I just create content and it's out there like a buffet. If you're dealing with relationship issues, well, here's my experience with 2 divorces and dating over 100 women. If you're dealing with mindset issues or fulfillment, well, here's how I found it. And so every day I write at least 2,000 to 3,000 words just to practice, like a boxer goes to the gym and punches the bag. I read a ton, and I create YouTube videos, blog posts, and I'm a dad too. So I try to juggle all of those things in between.
Yeah.
So that's my day to day, is that, exercise and taking care of myself, etc. But that's my day to day. It's just learning more, just pursuing that pursuit of knowledge, which is it's endless, and just trying to share with other people the things that I find that are keys in my life.
Awesome. Well, let's focus on the dad zone, because you got 2 that are at home with you and you're full time custody with them, right? So what are some of the things, and that's been for 2 years that you've had full custody?
It's been for 4 now.
4. Okay. Wow.
Right.
Yeah. Because it is 2024. Holy smokes. We've made it, folks. We made it to the 4 years later. Nailed it. So 4 years. So that means they were what? Do my math here. 4 and 6. Yeah. Okay.
Right.
When you took that, and that in that age, there's a lot going on, because that's like right when they start maybe getting into activities or getting into the kindergarten zone, getting into elementary school. There's a lot going on in that. So what have been some of the big takeaways that you've had in those 4 years of taking on full-time custody with your kiddos?
Oh, where do I start, right? But one of the main things that I realized, and this brings me back to a time when they had just moved in with me after the divorce. So the separation took place. I was homeless for a couple months. I lived in my car, and there was even a new guy in the house that I was paying for. And then a few months later, I found an apartment, and it turns out to be the exact same apartment that my family had moved out of to go to the house. So it was almost like a torture chamber, because every scratch on the wall, every hole, there were still even crayon marks from my kids from when we lived there 2 years before that. Yeah. So one day, my kids just show up on my front doorstep, and mom is not there. And that's how I became a full-time dad. A couple of weeks later, I got laid off, and then we went into COVID quarantine. So it was almost like 3 punches, like Mike Tyson fighting an infant.
Right. Oof.
Yeah. And that really brought me to reality pretty quick, because there was no escaping myself. before I was the breadwinner and I saw my kids a few hours a day, probably like great majority of fathers who work and are perhaps the main income in the house, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the first thing that I realized was how I repeated patterns from my parents without noticing it. And the second breakthrough was learning how to become more patient, because I think that as parents, we struggle a lot with patience, right? We have to repeat ourselves a million times. Things don't go our way. We start building this anxiety in our chest, and that leads to behavior that we later regret. Sometimes you raise your voice at your children and you realize what you've done and it feels shitty. You don't feel good about it. And one time the kids were having snack and I had cleaned these floors, I don't know, God knows how many times, wiping them and cleaning them. And I tell them, don't play and eat at the same time. Don't play and eat at the same time. And next thing you know, and now I'm having a breakdown in the bedroom by myself. I had gotten a text from my ex, and I was just sobbing my heart out. And all of a sudden, I hear them laughing, silence, and the sound of liquid just splashing on the floor. And I come out and I look, and there's 2 glasses of chocolate milk fully spilled on the floor that I had just cleaned maybe 4 times a day, on top of the dog, on top of their clothes, and I lost it. And I screamed and I said, I forgot what I said now, but it was something like, I told you not to do that. And out of anger, I smashed my phone on the floor. And after doing that, I looked at my kids, and the look of fear in their eyes was something that just brought me to a rude awakening, because here I was, this strong adult, solely responsible for protecting them, for providing them the emotional state that I wish I had as a kid. And I was violating that. I was abusing my power. I was abusing my leverage. I was abusing my age, my size. And I realized that I lost that composure because of the expectations that I had, not because I had done anything wrong, but because I expected them to behave a certain way. And when that didn't happen, I reacted that way. And that's when it clicked for me, because I said, well, we're not patient with our kids. Oh, I'm so patient with you. I've heard that a million times. You have to be patient with yourself to understand that you become frustrated because you have a particular outcome in mind. And when that outcome doesn't unfold as you expected, we resort to some improper ways of behaving. And that affects everyone around us. So that to me was a real big breakthrough, just understanding that I'm not wise enough to know how the atoms are going to connect in a future point in time to produce a specific outcome. So I would just relax and give myself a break. And every time something didn't happen the way that I expected it to, especially with kids, which are just like nitroglycerin, that really made my life a lot easier, and parenthood a lot more enjoyable, because suddenly I freed myself from those expectations, and therefore I freed them from them too.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure you're not the only one that's ever had a scenario like that, where you walk in and maybe water's flowing from the ceiling. That's happened. I've had that conversation a couple of times recently, or the expectations of what we have when they're broken. And I mean, shoot, that happens in the work environment. That can happen in a lot of different places, right? At the end of the day, we can only control ourselves. But setting those expectations is key. So you had that experience, you busted your phone, which just adds to all the things now we have to go do, right? And it seemed to be a bit of an eye opener with, I mean, you were flying solo at this time, right? So you're not only the one that isn't doing it, but you're also the one that's going to have to reflect and catch yourself without having someone give you that feedback and say, hey, look, here's what I saw, right? So that takes a lot of I don't know what the word would be, but that takes a lot of introspection to be able to see those things and then to act on them. Because we all have our tendencies. And something else you said, you started noticing things that your parents had done. And sometimes it seems like we're rolling into those like Geico commercials, where they're walking the parents through all the stuff. And I'm like, oh, that's funny. And then all of a sudden you catch yourself, you're like, ooh, wow, that's funny because it's, it's got some truth. There's Geico does not sponsor this podcast, but and was that earlier on or was that like recently?
No, that was right at the beginning of
Yeah.
single fatherhood, right at the beginning, and also right at the beginning of deciding to just go in and face the dragon, right? Face the monster. Face, if you've watched The Matrix, face Mr. Smith, and figure out how to deal with it. Why was it that I felt in certain ways that weren't constructive, weren't pleasant, and how to change that. And that took a while. Like you said, a lot of introspection, becoming self-aware was key, of the things that I did without realizing it. Because it turns out that in order for me to free myself from the guilt of that moment, because that guilt is what pushed me to change in many ways, because I did not want to repeat that scene, that emotional state. I also learned that we have no choice but to learn from those around us. You don't even get to pick what you learn. You just learn. You just learn by assimilation, by somebody like my dad said. He could have preached, God and Christ and whatever until he got tired, but I learned from his examples. I learned from what he did, what he said, how he behaved with other people. And because you don't have any other point of reference while going through life, which is something that we seem to be figuring out as we walk.
Mm-hmm.
When you're faced with certain situations, you resort to something that you saw in someone else just to even have a response. Because otherwise, what do? You either freeze, flight, or fight.
Right. Well, and that goes with the saying, actions are louder than words. Sure. Right. And the other saying that comes up a lot is more things are caught than taught. And so that's a big one. What in your experience in the last 4 years, you're just kind of focusing on that kind of time period. I would imagine that you found some systems that work and don't work to run the household, to get the kids where they need to go, to do the things that, that your family does. Have you found any systems or kind of those how-tos or tricks that you found that have worked really well for you guys? Because I know there's some other dads that are listening that are in a similar boat as far as having full custody, single fatherhood. And even if that doesn't apply to you guys, like, this is a systems thing. Like, the household really is a big system, if we look at it. And some of them, if it's not working, it means the system, might be off, and we can fix the system. So that's the reason I'm asking the systems based, and it doesn't apply only to those that are full custody of their kids and single parenting. It applies to all of us. And I'm just looking for any tips, because I'm always looking for the best help I can get to become better. So I'd love to learn from you, see what you found.
Yeah. The first axiom of, so I consider myself a decent dad. At this point, my kids are thriving. They're emotionally healthy. We have a connection that I have not seen any other parents have with them. Not to diminish other parents' connections with their children, but my exposure to them has created a different sort of bond and a different understanding. My kids are in the gifted programs in school, and they're doing well. My son, it's a little genius. My daughter is an incredible artist. And those are things that you cannot achieve if you're not in a good emotional state. And the first challenge to being a decent dad was to understand who I am as a person. And just like that segment of the expectations, well, I really had to ask myself a million questions. Why do I want things this way? Why do they have to be this way? Why do I think this system needs to be like this? Because as a kid, I had a system. If I didn't wake up at the second call, I'll get a glass of cold water in my face, or I'll get the sheets pulled from me, or I'll get pulled from my feet and dragged onto the floor. And if I didn't make my bed with 4 corners before heading to breakfast, then I will have to make all of the beds in the house, and so on and so forth. I couldn't answer no matter what the request was. And if I messed up in any way, shape, or form, I faced punishments from standing against a corner wall until I was told that I could turn around and leave, or kneeling on corn, or if I fought with my brother and it was his fault, obviously it was always his fault. Then I will have to hug him and kiss him on the cheek 100 times and tell him I'm sorry. I mean, so I was indoctrinated in a way that it was rather extreme, or at least exigent. And I had to unwind all of that. Because number one, I knew at the time that didn't feel good. I didn't see any reason to it, and I never justified it throughout my life. And then I also had to understand how that related to me as a father and why I expected from my kids. So once I understood who I was and I got answers to all of those questions, why do I want my kids to do this versus this? How am I benefiting them instead of hindering them? I came through a Jordan Peterson video where he said something, I'm going to paraphrase, but he said something like, kids are born perfect and our job is to get up the least we can. And that drove it home for me, because they are perfect. I mean, kids, they don't stress. They don't live in the future. They're incredibly graceful. I mean, my daughter handled 103 fever for 3 days like a champ, and I got this freaking flu and I'm moping around like I just got hit by a train. And so once I understood that, then my next task was to understand my kids. And both my kids are different. My son, it's a lot more like me. He thinks rationally. He likes to build things. He likes numbers. And my daughter is more emotional. She likes the artsy side of things. And I had to learn and develop the skills to actually communicate with them in a way that it worked.
Mm-hmm.
Once I got that base, it's that I was able to build a system that worked for everyone, that allowed them to be individuals and also allowed them to learn their responsibilities that will make them a better human. So perhaps I don't force them to make their beds, but I explain to them why making their beds is actually important, and it gives them a sense of accomplishment, and why they shouldn't take school too seriously, but they actually should try to learn, right? I try to help them find that balance, and the system just came together as an organic result of just us merging and treating each other like human beings who are completely different, but sharing a journey together. And that helped us find a middle ground.
Interesting. Yeah. That's, do they make their beds? I'm curious. Like you didn't tell them they had to.
When they want to. My son, it's got this rebel persona that I have. So I get him. I get it. But sometimes he'll come and say, "Hey, Dad, I cleaned my whole bedroom," and that's great. And I tell him, "How did that feel?" Because at the end of the day, I want to teach them that it feels good to them. I mean, yeah, sure, but they're doing me a favor by me not having to go clean their bedroom. But
Sure.
But because I'm okay with that, because I also understand that that's my cross to bear, because they didn't ask me to be here. They didn't ask me to go have them. They didn't want to come into this life. Who knows? So I accepted my responsibilities as a father and said, well, I have to bear this cross until I have to bear it. And eventually they started bearing their own weight. So, but sometimes they do, sometimes they don't.
Yeah. They're kids.
They're kids.
And it does take us to help guide them around, like you were talking through, when they're old enough, like your 10-year-old, and especially if they're in a more gifted program, can understand some of the logic behind the reasoning. So like my eldest son is very logical. You can explain things and typically it's going to click. And he's like, I get it. I get the logic. And therefore, I'm going to roll with that. Right. Whereas my other two are showing to be more of the emotional side. And so, you have to balance each of those areas. How we operate, at least for us, is we do have boundaries. Like here's your area of operation. Within that area of operation, we're going to be pretty good. When you go outside of the area of operation, then we're going to have, some issues and some consequences, because the world does have boundaries, right. And whether we like it or not, I mean, so that part is something that we believe we need to help enforce and reinforce, so that they can understand that when we're not a part of their daily equation anymore, they understand how to operate those things, how to maneuver with them, and then also how how to lead in some ways themselves. So, it's always a tricky balance, and as they change, I change, right? As we get older and learn more, they're getting older. So we're always kind of doing this dance so far. And every time I have a sit down with someone like yourself, I learn something new too, where I'm like, you know what, I'm going to go try that. Right. Because it's testing and iterating, in
Right.
many ways. So,
And it's our job to socialize. And I was a pretty unsocialized kid. I mean, just coming from that exigent background, I didn't know how to behave in the world. I just knew that I had to follow the rules or I'll be punished. But that also made me a rebel at heart. And I faced a lot of challenges through life, not only with friends, but also at work or in relationships. That being that rebel, that guy, I'll do whatever I want. That I wasn't properly socialized. I didn't understand why I needed to play the game in a certain way. And so that's right. Those boundaries exist just to say, hey, listen, you're your own free human being, but this is what's gonna happen if you go like Simba. If you go into the dark area, the hyenas might go and get you, and I might not be there to go and save you. And so you have to know that. But besides that, sometimes they have to stumble and get their knees dirty to realize, damn, that was right. But yeah, so I agree with you.
What and you said you moved many times when you were young. So
Yeah.
from the socialization standpoint, and in countries, moving around different countries, not only do you have social dynamic changes and just the stability or lack thereof during that time, but you're also moving into different cultural changes as well. So like, so where you're raising your kids from versus your experience is very different, clearly, as you've said. So what are some of the areas that as you have been raising these kids for the last 4 years and you continue to grow, and you have that period where you came to a point, that I'm glad that you had something happen, right? You had something happen that was kind of this aha moment that turned you around, that got you in a different path. And I don't know if I said it before, I'm going to say it again if I did. For anyone that's ever thought, because of, whatever dynamics go on in your life, that, a life insurance policy is worth more than you are, don't believe that, because that's very untrue. Any dollar amount, in my humble opinion, would never replace what you are to your kids, to your wife in many circumstances, to your group around you. So don't be fooled by that one. But where have you been able to find a good group of guys to surround yourself with that have been able to kind of, you connect with? And I'm putting you on the spot a little bit, I guess, but that you can connect with and you can have people to talk to in these, even the last couple years, that, so that you're not necessarily flying solo through this thing.
Yeah, it's funny because almost, if you've ever watched anime or stories and you see this old man in the mountain, right, who fought the battles and knows the martial arts and knows the secret moves, he's always alone. And ironically, that's been my life ever since. I have my fiance who's my support, and my other half. But other than that, this path that I've chosen, or that I've accepted, because I didn't choose this path, I feel almost like it was pushed onto me, which I'm thankful for, because up until the moment I didn't have a path, has kept me very isolated. I just the fact that I read and that I write and that I explore and that I test and I iterate and that I want to be in the here and now, present with my children, and it's kept me really in this sagey situation where I'm in the mountain and I just keep doing my work from here. And when this experience happened, I saw some sort of validation or comfort from those around me, and even my family distanced themselves a little bit because they didn't know what happened to me. one day I was this entrepreneur who want to make millions of dollars, and all of a sudden I'm talking about this thing that they oh God, and this and that, but now I was talking about it, and they thought I lost my mind. And many, I think out of all my friends, only one of them stuck around just because he's known me long enough, and he knows that I wouldn't, that I'm not, that I didn't jump into a cult per se. And I was trying to drag him in, it was more like, hey dude, this happened to me. I don't know what to make of it. And he stuck around. So I haven't been lonely, but I've been alone. I've been pretty much by myself for the last few years.
Well, consider this an open invite that when you decide you want to come down from the mountain, you getting your writings in and doing stuff like that. If you ever want to bounce stuff off of, you've got my information and my number. So you just holler at me.
I appreciate it. I really, and you know what, truth is, this is me coming out of it, because, writing the book was one part, but then it took me a while to come around and say, do I want to go out and share this experience, and how do I do it? And it's a challenging topic. So me being interviewed and being in magazines and podcasts, that's me sort of coming out of the mountain in a way and say, hey guys, look, maybe I'm not looking for a company, but I think I have something valuable, and hear this. And if you want, you do what you want with it, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, that's one way to come and start getting out there that's like 0 to 100, hang on, this podcast, this magazines, like, let's do that.
But I appreciate it. I'm not dismissing your invite, and I might actually accept it simply so I can step out of my comfort zone.
Sure.
So I appreciate that. So it means a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, so this, the podcast here, exists for really three things. The 3 pillars, we've talked about them some, we're going to talk about more. And that is, as dads, there's a lot of, so like skilled dad, this came up in conversation the other day. Skilled dad is an aspirational term, because there are a lot of things, like what is skilled? Well, like, let's do the circle of, especially with full custody kits, right? Food, money, like all the things. There's a lot of skills involved there. There's also, on the podcast, it's mostly, excuse me, Freudian slip. It's mostly about the soft skills that we can learn, how we can build our mindsets, the learnings from listening and emotional intelligence and all those things. Leadership. That's what we'd love to talk about them. Part of the soft skilled side goes to the podcast because it's hard to like interpretive dance how to use tools and hard skills and stuff. The second pillar, though, is hard skills, because I've had a lot of people, I mentioned this in a previous podcast, but I have this little sticker that I'll use just to, when I see guys doing awesome stuff with their kids, I'll go and intro myself and give them a sticker and say, you're doing a good job, because I don't think, many dads get a lot of the kudos, not that we necessarily are looking for them or want them, but I do think that maybe it's swung the opposite way, where dads are getting a little bit more of the shaming and the whatever stuff you want to talk that's not positive. I think that's dumb, because we all play a role and a part. So I'll give them the sticker, and a lot of times people that have listened to the show or hear about it, they kind of get quiet and like, hey, are you going to teach about like hard skills? Like, they don't say hard skills, that's my word, but like how to use tools or what tools to use. My dad never learned. My friends talk about, but I don't want to mention the fact I don't know, yada, yada, yada. So that's coming, guys, hard skills. But the third part, which I think is the most important part in many ways, is the community aspect. It's so that, 3, 4 years ago, 2 years ago, 4 years ago, you or someone listening can have the opportunity to A, learn how, and B, build a community around them so that we're not necessarily isolated. Defeating dragons is tough. We want to go slay as many as we can. I want to do it with a posse if I can, though, like a tactical right. Squad dragon slayers or something like that. But
that sounds cool.
let's go. We get some hand gestures and stuff and go attack that gate together. But being dad shouldn't be DIY because there's so much out there, and like you're teaching me things that you've experienced because I haven't had those experiences, but I have something that I can take from your story, and I'm sure others that have listened to it can as well. But anyway, so I offer that, and I offer it genuinely because A, you're a cool guy. B, it's important for us to have other men around us that make us better and can also sometimes pull us out of the dark spots. We pull them out of the dark spots and also celebrate the bright spots. Like we can focus a lot on the negative. It's not about that. It's like, let's focus on the positives and work through, like you said, charge through those negatives. So anyway, small rant on my end, but it gets me fired up because you can really see some of the lights come on, and then that disperses to our kids and our families and our communities, and a lot of good things happen from that. So
yeah,
anyway.
you become, it's a trite phrase, but they say you can't give to others until your cup is full. And I can agree with you that I think as human beings, we often point out the things that we consider are not going according to plan. And seldom we even give ourselves a pat in the back. So something that I learned from being alone is how to become your own rock. And something I learned from Tony Robbins, one of his speakers, but he had us sit and he said, look at your hand. So I'm like, okay, so look at my hand. So, okay, really look intently at your hand. And he said, now extend your hand up and now go to stay and be like, you're freaking amazing. And it sounded stupid, but the feeling, the positive feeling was inevitable, right? And once I got over that judgmental thing of looking at my hand and patting myself on the back, it's that sticker that you give to somebody, that little hint of, hey man, good job. Here's a little to push you forward. And that does make you want to keep going a little more. That is the little candy that sometimes you need to say, okay, you know what? I'm going to learn something new because it feels good. And maybe somebody will recognize it. If nobody does, at least I will recognize it. You talk about hard skills. Listen, I can talk about mindset and emotional development all you want, but I just bought a miter saw and I don't know what the hell to do with it. And I'm looking at your tools back there, and I cannot name half of them. Right.
We'll play with that.
I cannot name half of those tools. And so in a way, we're all a piece of a bigger puzzle. And it's foolish to think that you can do it on your own, because whether you're alone or you're surrounded with people, you always need to fetch the knowledge from others that have done what you've already accomplished. And you can start building from level 10 instead of always from the basement because somebody already did it for you. So I see eye to eye with that one.
Yeah, 100%. We don't have to reinvent the wheel over and over and over, because then how far we get is, it just slows us down. But hey, if you want to talk about miter saw stuff, you just holler at me, man. We're building stuff all day long, not on this podcast.
No, because my fiance is gonna get me to build crap, so I've been avoiding watching an instructional YouTube video. Okay, so I don't have to go build furniture.
You just unlocked a whole lot of stuff for me. So everyone buys the tools, so they could say that they have them, maybe, but they don't actually want to learn how to use them. So then they don't have to make all the stuff. Is that what's going on?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no. Well, in my case, I happen to like it. I just built some flower beds because we moved to the forest in PA a few months ago, and now I went from living in New Jersey and having everything done for me to having bears come and take my garbage out and building flower beds and understanding, this seed growing stuff for the grass. So
hey, that's perfect. And you know what? I know there's a lot of guys listening right now that can probably help you out. Because I know I've got some grass specialists on here for the yard kind of grass specialists, and they can probably throw you some tips. But no, Victor, I appreciate you taking the time to be on here. Time always goes so fast, and now you've got me all fired up about doing some stuff on mitered saws, so I can help out. as we wrap up, where can people find you and learn more about you if they want to check you out?
I have a website, which is my name, Giusfredi.com, where I have blog posts, my latest podcasts and magazine appearances and stuff that I like to share. I've started a YouTube channel, although I'm still finding my voice in it because I started with hero mindset and some practical exercises. And then I'm realizing that maybe I shouldn't be so cautious because I've been really cautious in sharing my experience and the way that I think, because I thought it was rather odd. So I'm still finding my voice, but my YouTube channel is called Hero Academy X. And if not, no Grail without dragons.com.
Awesome. I'll include all those links within the show notes as well as on the website, SkilledDad.com. Victor, let's stay in touch, man. And if I can ever help with anything, you let me know. When you start throwing videos out on tools, you let me know. So then we can like just continue to learn there, and we'll be ready to roll. But thanks, Victor. I appreciate it, man. We'll talk soon.
It's such a pleasure, Zach. Thanks for doing this work for me and for a lot of other people. So you've already helped me, and thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely, sir. My pleasure. Well, guys and gals, thanks for hanging on to us for this conversation for this long. If you're still here, I know you've got something from this. And, Victor's got a powerful story, and we only touched on just a portion of it. He and I have talked more through other parts of it. I mean, we all have, that's the important thing. We all have important aspects of our story that we can bring to the table. And it can be hard to sit on this podcast and actually like share that story and actually share some of the things that are harder to talk about. Challenging to talk about. But as Victor said, it comes that point where it's like, hey, here's the dragon, we're going to go slay it. Here's the challenge, we're going to go attack it. If you're in that sales world, that's where I come from back in the day. I believe it was Jeb Blunt who said, well, actually it comes from Mark Twain, I believe. You got to eat the frog. There's a thing that you don't want to do. There's a thing that you want to avoid. And in this case, you don't want to eat that frog. But if you eat the frog first, then everything else is so much easier and so much faster because it just sticks and it weighs. So let's go eat the frog, slay the dragon, go after it, whatever it might be. The last part that I'll throw out is I'm going to continue to talk about the community aspect because it continues to come up in many, many ways. If you're looking for people in your area, reach out to us because we're kind of exploring some options of how we could start to connect people that are listening to the show, that follow SkilledDad, that could meet, whether it be virtually or in real life. And it's not necessarily like this mastermind group or anything. What it is people with common interests that want to connect socially, get to know each other, and then potentially build a community through that. So let us know. You can go to hello@skilleddad.com or any of our socials at SkilledDad. And finally, if you thought of anyone after hearing this story that you think should hear it, please send it to them. Please send it to them because at the end of the day, we want to help as many people as we can, just to connect, just to hear stories, to learn things so that we can become better on our journey to becoming the Skilled Dad. We're excited that you were here. We appreciate Victor coming on. And you know what? We're going to see you in the next episode of the Skilled Dad.